July 7, 2024. We're here to interview Simon Margel, who is a survivor of the Holocaust. The videographer is Esther Andor, and Today is July 7, 2024. We're here to interview Simon Margel, who is a survivor of the Holocaust. The interviewer is Esther Andor, and the videographer is Robert Lasson. We're doing this video under the auspices of the USC Shoah Foundation, and the video will be deposited in the archives of the USC Shoah Foundation and the Montreal Holocaust Museum.
And recording.
Good afternoon, Simon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for accepting to be interviewed.
My pleasure.
For our project. I will start with asking you your first name and last name, and if you could also spell your last name.
Okay, my name is Simon Margel, Margel.
And could you tell me where and when you were born?
I was born in Antwerp, Belgium, January 5th, 1943.
Very good, thank you. So now we're going to go back and see what you know about your grandparents.
My grandparents? Okay.
Yes, let's start with the paternal grandparents.
Okay.
Their names, where they were from, occupations, and then I'll ask you if you don't mention something.
Okay. My father's parents, the father was called Yechiel Margel, and he was married to my grandmother, Chaya Sura Margel. I was very fortunate that I did have the opportunity to live with, or to have our grandfather live with us. After the war, he lived with us for about a year, and one of the memories that I have about him is that we used to play dominoes together very frequently, remembering that I was a little boy then. Anyway, so that's my father's parents.
Don't rush.
Yes.
Since you have a memory of playing with your grandfather, do you have a memory of what he looked like?
Yes. And I do have a picture of him also. My grandfather was extremely Orthodox, was an elderly gentleman when I met him, with a long beard, and that's it. We theoretically come from a very Orthodox family. My father and family lived in Poland, in a city called Dukla, D-U-K-L-A. And one of the interesting things about Dukla is that eventually Montreal's chief rabbi was Rabbi Hirschsprung. And Rabbi Hirschsprung was born in Dukla. He was about 10 years older than my dad, but he knew my father as a young boy. And he became friends, Rabbi Hirschsprung became friends with our extended Montreal family. My father, when he was a little boy, also was very religious. He had what they call payas, curls around his ears. But as he grew older, I guess he became, let me say, more modern, and was not as orthodox, but remembered whatever he learned when he was a little boy. So we always did what he and, let's say, his father would have been proud of us. We went to the synagogue important times. When my parents passed on, I prayed for them 11 months for each of them. And my father, we had family get-togethers Friday evenings, and so anyway, so that's about my dad.
I still have questions.
Yes.
When you say that they were very Orthodox, do you mean they were Hasidic?
Dukla was known as a very Hasidic type of town or village. So yes, at one time they were. I don't know exactly what the significance of what I'm telling you now, but my grandfather's father was one of the important rabbis in a Polish village called Limanov. Liminov. So again, the family is theoretically Orthodox. And the last important thing about my grandfather, my grandmother died very early in her life. I think she may have been around 32 to 35 years of age. So she died young. And when my grandfather died, he was in his 70s, I believe. His request was to be buried in Bnei Brak, a city that you possibly know in Israel, which is a very religious city.
Do you know what his occupation was?
He was involved in the diamond business when I knew him in his latter years. What he did, sort of from 20 years on, 20 years older, I don't know, maybe it was always diamond, but I remember he was in the diamond business.
Now, you mentioned that you knew him as a little boy. That was after the war. How did he survive the war and where?
What I do remember is that he spent time in Switzerland. What he did or how he survived, I don't know that. But I do know that near the end of his life, my father asked him to come and live with us, which he did.
From Switzerland?
Yes.
I think you mentioned in the pre-interview that he had a second wife after the death of his first wife?
Yes, who I didn't know either wives. So I know that his first wife unfortunately passed away, as I said, at a young age. His second wife, they got divorced.
And how many, so he had your father, how many other children did he have?
There are 4 children in the family, 2 boys, 2 girls. I know that my father was the youngest in the family. And the 2 girls survived. My dad survived. But his brother, who also was in Auschwitz, I was told died the day after liberation. And the way I heard it is he overate and he died.
What was the name of this brother, do you know?
Abraham.
And the 2 sisters?
One was Lottie and the other one was Rachel.
Where did they survive? In Poland, or had they left Poland also?
No, they had left Poland. Rachel lived in Belgium also, as I remember. Lottie married my uncle in Germany, and they subsequently moved to Mexico.
Before the war?
Just after the war, I believe. And I was very fortunate that family is very close. I used to spend lots of summers in Mexico, vacationing from the hard work in school. If we're finished with my dad's side of the family, my mother was born in a city called Kivyasht, and the spelling is Kijvard.
Kivjard.
RD.
Or ZD. ZD. I found it.
You found it?
Yes.
Good. Interestingly enough, today it's part of the Ukraine, but when my mother was born, it was Czechoslovakia.
And before that, it was Hungary.
Yes?
Yep. It's the Subcarpathian Rus. One of those territories where you didn't move from your city and you lived in several countries.
Right. Anyway, so my mom's parents, her father was called Shia, S-H-I-A. My mother's maiden name was Markovich. And my mother's name was Gittel. My mother had one sister, a couple of years younger than she, and 2 brothers. And part of the story is that My mother and her sister left Kivyasht, I'm going to say around 1939, and moved to Belgium. The 4 remaining Markoviches perished by the Germans.
Do you know what your maternal grandfather did for a living?
He was a peddler, yes.
With what? What kind of?
I think that he used to go from house to house in a truck that he had and selling clothes. Something very interesting happened to us, but I don't know if it's that important. But to make a long story as short as I can, part of my family today lives in Israel, and one day there was a gentleman who came into one of the synagogues in Israel and asked, because it was a Shabbos, and he asked if he can sit next to my cousin's son. And my cousin's son obviously said, sure, my pleasure, and as it's usually the case, they started talking a little bit, where are you from, etc., etc. The net result is that that man who lived in Miami happened to be best friends with my mother's and this cousin's grandmother's best friends. He said to my cousin's son, I walk to school every morning with your mother's 2 brothers. Anyway, the sad part of what happened, as I said, is all 4 of them were killed during the Holocaust.
Were they older or younger than your mother, these brothers?
I'm not quite sure of their ages, but I do know that my mother was 2 years older than her sister.
Who was called Leah, right?
Leah,
yeah.
Yes.
How religious was your mother's family, her parents?
They were, let me say, not that religious. They were definitely Jewish and doing whatever European Jews would be doing, but not as orthodox as, let me say, my father's family. But we did all the traditional things, and typically, like what happens to a lot of North American families, I guess, we always ate kosher, we always went to shul for the high holidays, my mother lit Shabbos candles, and so we did all these things.
Let's move on to your father. What was his name?
My father's name was Nathan. And the cute thing about his name is sometimes he spelled it with an H, and sometimes he just spelled it Natan. And I've seen, and I have some documents with his signature written in 2 different ways, Nathan and Natan.
Do you know what year he was born in?
Yes, he was born in 1919, March 12th.
What do you know about his education?
Not very much. No, I don't know very much, but I do know that he must have been taught lots of things in the, let me say, Jewish parts. He had lots of books, which I still have some of them. But I don't know the education that he had, and neither do I know the education of my mom.
When did he leave Dukla?
I'm guessing now that he left also around the same time, around 1939, I would say.
And where did he go?
He as well as my mother, separately, both ended up in Belgium.
Why Belgium? Do you know?
I think that Belgium was one of the countries that accepted immigrants let me say, readily. I may be wrong, but I've thought of that question before, and I think it's because Belgium accepted immigrants easier than other countries.
Did they have family there already before they went?
That is also part of it, yes. My mother had an uncle living in Belgium, and my father did not. But my father, I don't know if he came with his brother, but his brother lived in Belgium too. And the children of the four people, we at one time when we were all alive, we knew each other very well.
Where did they first settle your parents? In which town?
In Belgium specifically, in Antwerp.
Both of them?
Yes. What I understand is when they were young, when they had just arrived, there was what I understand to be something similar to the local YMHA, and that's where they met. And the way they explained to me, it was a place where sometimes they had dances and they had parties, and so that's, let me say, where they fell in love. Same story for my aunt, meaning my mother's sister, the same thing, and she also found her spouse in the same place.
Could you describe to me your father, both in terms of what he looked like and in terms of character?
Right. Let me use the word, he must have been a special man. Talking now, some of the recent thoughts that I've had of him. First of all, he was a wonderful father. A very, very nice person. Very friendly. Never hit his children. I happen to have a sister, much younger than I. My mother was the authoritarian. She's the one that told us what we did wrong or what we did right occasionally. My father was just a wonderful human being.
And what did he look like and how did he dress?
My father was a short person. He must have been 5'7", and sort of a normal, looking person of 5'7". Well, one of the things that maybe I shouldn't say, but I'll say it, he did have a pronounced Jewish nose, but he was a very nice person. He wasn't the world's handsomest person, but he was at least average. And anyway.
How did he dress? In a suit?
Normal, whatever normal means. He wasn't one that would wear a suit to bring down the garbage. He was a normal person. And part of what I'm going to be telling you is, to me, even though my father suffered a lot being in concentration camp, when I grew up, when he was living with us, he was a normal father. I mean, I never noticed anything negative about him. And one of the sad things for me is that I should have asked some questions about what he had lived through prior to him unfortunately passing away. He never spoke to us about anything that happened in the concentration camp. Never.
Why do you think that was?
I'm not sure. I've discussed it with a few people, and the message that I got is that many survivors did not discuss what happened to them. I find it a little strange, and I spent some time today speaking to my son, telling him that whatever questions he or his wife have about anything, they should ask, because at one time it's going to be too late and there'll be nobody to ask. But I'm a little upset with myself that I did not take that opportunity. My father passed away at a young age. I happened to be 24 years of age when he passed. So I had many years where we lived together where I could have asked. But I never asked. He never told me. And the only information that we had is when my wife was able to sit down with my mother. And usually when I spoke to my mother about concentration camps, she would get nervous almost immediately. So I used to say, okay, Mom, it's all right, fine, let's talk about something else. But my wife was able to write down lots of notes. And I'm not sure if she understood everything clearly, because she was writing very quickly. And occasionally we've shared whatever it is that she wrote. Anyway, so that's the story there.
We didn't talk about yet what your father did for a living.
My father did a few things. The main thing that I remember when he was young, and I was young, he was a furrier. And I remember he came back from concentration camp. I know that he was a furrier wherever we lived in Belgium. He had a place in the basement where he would do whatever he had to do, refur. And when we came to Canada, he continued in the fur business until one day he decided to get involved in another business. He bought a restaurant with another gentleman. And the last part of his life is a long story, which I'll try to say very quickly, which is that he got involved in real estate.
Let's move on to your mother. What was her name?
My mother's name was, she had a few names that I remember. In the Hungarian/Czech, it was Hermina, but in Canada and Belgium it was either Hella or Helen. So I think her legal name was Hella Margel.
Hella with the one L?
Yes.
And you mentioned that she was born in Kivjezd. What year?
In 1920. March 15th, 1920.
When she went to Belgium, relatively young, 18, what did she do? Like, did she work?
I believe she worked. She had to support herself, and her sister also had to support herself. I was told that my mother also happened to be in the fur business. What that meant is before you make a coat, you have to cut the pelt, and you have to sew it, and so those are some of the steps that she had learned and was doing. You know.
And when you remember her later after the war, was she working with your father in the fur business?
Whenever he needed some assistance, she would help him, but let me say, I hope it's politely, that she was a housewife.
In Canada as well, or did she have to go out and work in Canada?
When my father was involved in the restaurant business, my mother also had a reputation of being the world's greatest cook. There are numerous family members that have recipes from Hella. And years ago, whenever people invited us, they would say, "Oh, this is your mother's gefilte fish. This is your mother's cheesecake," or whatever. Yes, but when my father was involved in the restaurant business, my mom used to help whenever she was able to. She would go and help out in the kitchen, I guess, and so that's the answer to that.
What did she look like and how did she dress?
My mother, as I saw pictures when she got married, was a very pretty woman, thin, but what I remember my mom as is a chubby lady. So my mother gained weight, I guess, as time went on. And near the end of her life, she lost weight. So, but again, she looked to me like a normal mother and a normal person. I do have some pictures of her, which I can show you later on. So that's...
You mentioned that she was the disciplinary in the household.
Yes.
What other characteristics stand out in your mind about your mother?
She was a great mother. She cared about her daughter, my sister, who's 10 years my junior. And that's one of the things that I think about, that I thank God that my father survived, so that I was able to have a sister. There was nothing really outstanding, except she was a wonderful wife, wonderful mother, great grandmother. When finally my wife and I had a child, that was her first grandchild, and she was very proud of him.
What did your parents tell about their life before the war in Antwerp, their life together? Do you know where they lived? What circumstances, like what financial standing they had?
My parents were never rich, worked hard. We never suffered, meaning my sister and I never suffered. The other cute thing, that's part of an answer, I guess, is many people in my family were very well-to-do. My parents were the poor ones, but it never affected me in any way. I've always enjoyed my life, and my parents never made us feel as if we have to worry about anything. So we lived normal lives. And I guess that's the answer.
Do you know anything about their living circumstances before the war, before your birth?
No. My parents were married in 1942. I know that.
Okay.
I wasn't there. And it's a little bit of a joke for me that I'm legitimate. My parents were born were married January 1942, and I was born January 1943. So my parents, I guess, in simpler English, were normal people. Never did my sister or I ever feel anything that we were missing. And we've always had a very nice life.
After the war, did you grow up in the apartment they had before the war?
No. I know that we moved very frequently, and I do have addresses of places that we moved to. The first few years of my life were spent in Antwerp, Belgium. And then eventually we moved to Brussels. And from Brussels, we moved to Montreal.
What language did your parents speak to each other?
Many languages. Yiddish, French, my father Polish. My mother didn't understand too much Polish, but as you probably know, Europeans speak many different languages. So my mother spoke and my father spoke Hungarian and Czech, and anyway.
What was his mother tongue and her mother tongue, though?
Wherever they were born. My father's mother tongue was Polish, and my mother's was Czech. But I'm sure that they spoke Yiddish in their homes also. I spoke Yiddish when I was a little boy, and I still speak Yiddish if anybody wants to speak with me. Or and my mother tongue was French.
The war breaks out. You are not born yet. Have they ever told you anything about the various anti-Jewish measures that were introduced in Belgium against Jews?
No.
No.
No. Again, as I said, my father never spoke about Auschwitz, never spoke about the war. And what I recall is when I was school age, I went to school, I came home, I did whatever I had to do, and we lived a normal life.
What happened to your father, though, during the war? You do know some things about it.
What happened to him? Meaning, what happened, I guess the first step is they got married, as I said, in January 42. Doing some mathematics, I assumed that my mother became pregnant in April of 42. And around August of 42, and this is some of the research that I've sort of discovered, August 42, he answered an ad about work, and this was in a place called Malines, which is not far from Antwerp, only to find out that as he went for that job interview, it was really not a job interview. It was the Germans thanking him for coming for the interview and putting him onto a train which eventually ended up in Auschwitz.
Do you know what kind of job he was applying for?
No.
But basically he was in the Malines transit camp, or Mechelen transit camp. That's where he was taken from.
And some of the information that I have dates of when he left Malines and when they landed in Auschwitz.
Can you share those dates with me?
Yes. You don't mind if I read some of this?
No.
So he arrived in Malines on the 5th of August, 1942. And that particular date until 31st of October, 1942, he was on a train to Auschwitz.
So he spent several months in the transit camp? From
No,
August to October?
No, from, I'm assuming from August to October probably to me sounds like what other people have told me, that 2 months. It's probably a short amount of time to go from Malines to Auschwitz. So I assume that he arrived, and the next day they put him on the train. So he didn't socialize in Malines.
He arrived in Auschwitz on the 31st of October?
Yes.
That's a few days travel, few days journey from Malines to Auschwitz.
Yes, but I'm saying that what I see here is that he arrived in Malines on the 5th of August, and he arrived in Auschwitz on the 31st of October.
Yeah, so he probably left Malines towards the end of October. So he must have spent 2-3 months in the transit camp.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. And,
He wouldn't have been on the train for 3 months.
When I speak to other people, they've told me that it would take 2 to 4 months by train to get from wherever to Auschwitz. You're telling me that that's not the fact. All right.
2 to 3 days, or maybe a week if they put the train aside, but
Okay,
definitely not months.
Fine. All right. Well, you're obviously, having interviewed many people, you know much more than I do about this. So what I do know from this are the dates that I've just given you.
Okay. And then, so he was in Auschwitz, he landed in Auschwitz.
Yes.
Did he go to other camps?
Yes. What I see from this document here is that he landed in Auschwitz on the 31st of October 1942, and he left Auschwitz on the 18th of January 1945. And one of the nice things, not the wrong word, one of the things that I've discovered is that next to his name it said Kohlengrube, which means the coal mines. So he probably, that was what he was doing in Auschwitz. And after January 18th, 45, I noticed that he went and was sent to 3 or 4 different camps for very short periods of time. So my conclusion is that the Germans were getting nervous that maybe different countries were approaching these places. So what I have found here is that he then left Auschwitz on January 18th, 1945, and he was sent to Buchenwald. And he was in Buchenwald not that long, till February 20th, for a month and 2 days. And then from Buchenwald, they send him to another place, which I did some research on, which phonetically is Ohrdruf, Ohrdruf, which what I read was it was part of the Buchenwald network. It was a Nazi forced labor and concentration camp, which was liberated by the U.S. Army, and it was the first camp that was liberated on April 4th, 1945. So my father was sent to this Ohrdruf between February 21st, 45, and March 20th, 45, so only 1 month in that place. Then on March 21st, he was sent back to Buchenwald till May 1st. And then on May 1st till May 9th, he was sent to Theresienstadt, where I guess May 9th may have been the end of the war in maybe Theresienstadt. And I have a story about what transpired in Theresienstadt the last day of his stay there.
So he was liberated from Theresienstadt.
Yes.
And yes, you did tell me a story about that, so if you could share that with us on camera.
Yes. What I was told is that I think it may have been the Russians that liberated Theresienstadt. And I was told that they tried to clean up the camp, and the definition of cleaning up for us meant that they would take all the dead corpses and put them in piles closest to wherever the bodies were. So there may have been 5 corpses over here, so was a pile of 5 dead bodies here, and then they would continue walking over there, and whatever dead bodies were there, they would pile them over there. And what I was told is sort of what I believe is a miracle. What happened I was told, is that he weighed 77 pounds at the time, and his body was in a pile of dead bodies. And there was a Dutch doctor that happened to be passing by the pile of dead bodies. And my father was able to do the following, to move one of his fingers. And as the Dutch doctor happened to look over, say, hey, wait a minute, that body is alive, pull it out. And that's what happened. They pulled out my father, and I guess as a quasi-scientific person, as an engineer, I say to myself, if his body would have been oriented slightly this way, the doctor wouldn't have seen the finger going that way. And why was the doctor walking over here? Maybe he could have walked to the next block. So for me, this is a miracle from God. So when they pulled him out of the pile, next miracle for me anyway is that he obviously was capable to give the people the information of who he was. And I don't know exactly how they tracked down my mother, but she did tell me that the Red Cross contacted her, and they asked her to come and meet them at a certain place. They warned her that my father didn't look that good, and to be prepared to see somebody that you may or may not recognize 100%. But it was my father, and eventually good things happened to him finally. He did have, after his medical checkup, he did have pleurisy, which is a lung type of problem. The Red Cross sent him to Switzerland in a sanitarium. I don't know how long he was there. They wanted to have him gain some weight and get back to normality. And eventually he came home to us, and by that time we were ready to move to Brussels with him. So to me, all this is a miracle.
When your father was taken in August 42, your mother was already pregnant. How did she manage without a breadwinner?
Right.
Pregnant.
I thought of that, especially after our interview. I was told that she was capable of getting some minor jobs doing fur type of things, cutting fur and sewing fur. And she must have been very, very lucky by having met many very nice people, most of them, if not all of them, being Gentiles who helped her out. I do know that she lived with one Belgian family with me for 9 months. And the rest, again, the survivors had to be creative, and they had to have friends. They had to have people who cared to help them out. And she was able to find nice people who did just that to her.
Where did she give birth to you in the middle of the war?
Why or when?
When? Where? Where, not why, where?
Okay. I was born in Antwerp. And
but where in Antwerp? That's what I mean.
In the house that we happened to be living in. And I'm assuming that was the place that my parents were living in. I do have the address, but I don't remember it offhand right now. I was born in the house. In other words, a doctor came to the house to help my mother give birth. So that's...
And who looked after her and after a newly born baby?
That's one of the things that I think about my mom, that she must have been a very special person, as many other mothers who unfortunately had their spouse away from them. But as they say en français, elle était débrouillard. She was able to do whatever needed to be done to survive and to do whatever had to be done. You know, I want to also share with you a story that my mother had told me, which again is in the context of a miracle. When she was pregnant, she happened to be on a train going somewhere. She didn't tell me where she was going, like when she told me the story. And the Gestapos stopped the train. They came on board, and they went through the whole train. My mother ran to the washroom, locked herself in the bathroom, and then she heard this knock on the door. She had no choice but to open up the door. And the SS officer saw that she was pregnant. And he said to her, okay, close the door quickly. And, all right, I'm not doing anything, just close the door. Other people were taken off the train and sent, I'm sure, to Auschwitz. But my mother was, with the help of God, saved.
Did you stay with your mother the duration of the war from January 43 to May 44?
No. Part of what my mom decided to do, and I guess she had assistance and conversations with different people, and probably somebody had suggested that you can save your child by putting him maybe in a convent if you would like. So my mother actually found a convent. Again, all of a sudden I forget where it was.
Liège.
In Liège, thank you. She had a meeting with the Mother Superior, and I think that it was, let me see, common, whatever common means. And she made a deal with the Mother Superior that I would remain in the convent, and if my mom and dad would perish, that I would become a priest. I had an alias. My name was Léon de Backer, and I don't know if I was told or if I remember, but every morning there was a picture of Jesus on the wall in front of my bed, and I used to, Petit Jésus, Petit Jésus. And I do, or my mother possibly may have told me that she came to visit me every Sunday and she would bring chocolates. And after a certain time, both she and I felt that I shouldn't be staying there anymore. And that's sort of miracle number 3. What happened there is, on one of her visits, she said to the Mother Superior that she wanted to take me home, wherever home was. The Mother Superior did not want me to leave. So my mother, with her strength and voice, made sure that she got what she wanted, which was that they eventually packed a little bag and gave to my mom, and including me. So we left And what happened is a couple of months later, that convent was bombed, and I'm assuming that not too many survivors. And one of the things that I read is that some mothers, to save their child, left their children in places like that. And I think of the bond that I had with my mother. She did not want to leave me.
Do you know how long you
I'll
were?
end that by saying just one thing to make it sound a little bit like a joke. I was, when I became much older, what they called a mama's boy. And I used to speak to my mother 4 or 5 times a day. Sometimes just saying, "Hi, Mom, how are you doing?" Not listening to the answer, but just making sure that I speak to my mom. So, obviously, I've concluded that she must have loved me as I did her. Anyway, so that's the answer to, was I with my mother all the time?
How long do you think you were in that convent? Could you figure something
some
out?
of the pictures, of which I have one nice picture, I'm assuming that I'm probably a year and 2 months old in that picture. And then sort of working backwards, maybe from 3 to 6 months maximum. I would go for the 3 months. I don't think my mom, if she had a choice, would leave me there longer than necessary. So I'm going to say 3 months. Anyway.
Do you have memories of when she came to visit you, or only
No,
she had memories?
No. She told me that she used to bring chocolates, and she visited me every week, and she also said to me that I had suggested to her that I wanted to not stay in the convent. And that, together with how she felt about me, made her decide to take me home.
But that means that you were able to speak?
Well, I'm sure after 1 year old, I was speaking. No.
Any other memories, like your own memories of the convent? Anything? Any flashbacks, smell, anything that you remember?
I don't remember any of that. No. As I said, I did some research, and my mom told me this particular story. My wife interviewed my mom and found out lots of other things. But again, for me, I was 1 year old. I don't remember.
What things did your wife find out about your mother or from your mother in that interview that would be relevant?
Details that I'm sharing with you today. And I think the lesson is that, notwithstanding the fact that numerous people that spend time in concentration camp did not share their lives in concentration camp with their kids, I think it's up to us to ask questions and find out, because when it's too late, it's too late. And anyway, I'm happy that my mother did have the opportunity, or my wife had the opportunity to speak to my mother and feverishly write notes. So at least we know a little bit more. And whenever I wanted to speak to my mother about the war, she would get nervous after 10 seconds, and then I would say, okay, Mom, it's fine. We don't have to continue talking about it.
You mentioned that you stayed with a family, you and your mother stayed with a family for 9 months. Was that after the convent?
No, that was sometime during the time that my father left, and
Before
the time when he came, when the war was over.
No, but you went first, then stayed with this family, and then she took you to the convent.
I believe that's the case, yes.
And then after the convent, where did the two of you hide, or how did you live? What did she tell you, or your wife?
No, I don't know how we lived at all. But again, the general comment is there were some nice people, and there are some nice people who helped some of the Jewish people that needed assistance.
Did your family ever try to contact any of these people that helped during the war? Your mother, or when you were an adult?
We became friends with some people who became our friends just after the war, but not specifically the question that you're asking me, to the point where that particular family we became very close to the extent that I referred to the lady as Mami and to the gentleman as Papi. They had a dog. Every time I see a black dog, I say, "There's Puggy," which was the name of the dog. And the other thing which has been on my mind, and I'm very sad that I haven't done anything about it, is they had a son who is a little older than I. His name was Christian, and I've always said to myself, and I've said to my wife, that I wouldn't mind trying to find Christian, starting even 20 years ago, and invite him to come to Montreal. But for some reason it didn't happen. I got as close as the Belgian embassy, but I didn't go in to find out. I tried to look him up, but it was very difficult to find out about him. I'm still thinking about doing it, but now we're a little older than I was 20 years ago. Anyway.
Who was this family? What can you tell me about this family that you got close to after the war? Who were they?
Their name was Serlupens. They were a Flemish type of family. Belgium is made up of French and Flemish type communities. I happened to be shopping with my mom one day, and she would go in a store, and I would sit outside on the stairs. And specifically what I remember is I used to chew gum, and this lady occasionally came to the same store. She started talking to me, and then my mother got involved, and they got to a point where they said that as a little boy I had flat feet, and the doctor had suggested that it would be a good idea for me to be in the sun more frequently than I was. And they used to, in the summertime, they used to vacation in, let me say, the Belgian, I don't think we can call it the Alps, but in very nice countryside of Belgium. And they used to take me there in summer times for 3-4 years, or I should say summers. So it was sort of part of my extended family, the way they treated me. And whenever we did go to Belgium, which my wife, occasionally my mother, sister, and I used to go to Belgium, and we used to looked them up, and anyway, they're part of my life. Yeah.
Which town were you and your mother in when the war ended? Antwerp?
We were in Antwerp, and when my father came back from Switzerland, we decided to move to Brussels.
Why was that?
I think there's more opportunity in Brussels to find jobs and things of that nature. Antwerp, let me say, for Jewish people is a little bit more religious than Brussels. Antwerp, most of the people either are studying Jewish things or in the diamond business. So anyway, so we moved to Belgium.
To Brussels?
Pardon me, to Brussels specifically, yes. And that's it. We did our life in Brussels, in Antwerp, and the general comment about me is I never felt any different from anybody else. I don't know what it means to have a father that just came back from concentration camp, or a mother that suffered by herself. For me, I was living a normal life. Then I went to a normal school, and I had normal friends, and life was no different for me.
Where in Brussels did your family settle?
Which area?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know Brussels that well?
Somewhat.
Schaerbeek.
Which was a Flemish area.
Yes. Yeah, I know a few Flemish words, but again, my mother tongue is French, and I went to French school, and the school was not far from where I lived.
Was it a public school?
Yes. École primaire de Schaerbeek.
Were there any Jewish children in your class or in the school?
I don't think there were too many, if any. My friends were classmates. I only went to school for the first 2 years. And after that, we moved to Montreal.
In those 2 years in the Belgian school, was there any talk of what happened to Jews during the war? Was there any mention of there are Jews in Belgium and there are non-Jews and
Right.
something happened? What is your...
No, I've never heard or felt in anything negative. My friends were whoever my classmates were, some of them, most of them surely being Christians, and I may have had some Jewish friends, but it wasn't something that I recall thinking that, you know, I'm in the minority here and I'm Jewish, etc., etc. And I can tell you that when we moved to Montreal, some of my classmates actually, they got together and they sent me some letters telling me, you know, they're sorry that I left, etc., etc. I do remember some of their names, and I was always treated nicely by their parents and them.
So would you go to each other's houses? Both they would come to you and you would come
Yes.
to them. So there was
Yes.
socializing that way.
Yes.
How about your parents? Did your parents have any close friends in those years in Brussels?
I think the answer is yes. I know that we did spend probably lots of time with my mother's sister and her family. They lived in Antwerp. My family in Antwerp were in the diamond business. And their 3 children and I refer to each other as brother and sister. So we were, and still are, very close. I lost one of my cousins. And eventually, as part of my professional life, I actually worked for my family
We'll
in
come to that.
my later years.
We'll come to that.
Yes.
How did Leah and her husband survive the war? Where were they?
I thought about that also. It's a good question. My uncle was a very capable man who the rumor is that he was supporting his parents and brothers and sisters when he was 13 years of age. So he was a very special, aggressive person that knew, let me say, the ropes. All that to say that he and his wife left Belgium to France, and they settled in a place called Pau, where one of my cousins was born. And I was told by my mom that my uncle wanted to help my parents come with them, but I guess you sought out some professionals who were able to take you across the border and these types of things, and it was too late for, let's say, my parents to follow them. But when my uncle found out that my father was in Auschwitz, I'm a little too sensitive. He said to my mother that he was prepared to adopt me. Anyway, so we're very, very close, or we were very close. My aunt and uncle have passed away since, and they were wonderful, wonderful people. And part of my character is a little bit like my uncle's, and I'm a student, and I liked the way he handled himself, and I try to follow some of his things. So they spend the time that my parents were, let me say, suffering, they spend it in France. They surely were suffering also.
But that was in the zone libre, in the free
Yeah.
zone, Paul, yeah. How did your parents pick up their life in Brussels after the war in terms of work?
I remember my father getting involved, or continuing to be involved in the fur business. We lived on the ground floor of a two-story house. My parents also had the basement area, and I remember him having a big sheet of plywood where he would be knocking in pieces of fur, and so he was in the fur business. So again, to me, my family was like any other normal type of family, doing whatever they had to do to support themselves. And as I said, my parents were never rich, but we never missed anything. As far as I'm concerned, we always had enough to eat. We had normal lives. And for me, I probably didn't even know what concentration camp was.
Religious life after the war. How was religious life in Brussels for your family in terms of synagogue going, the community, as well as at home?
Right. I think of that, or have thought of that also in the past, where, especially when my grandfather moved in with us, my father, who had gone from being a yeshiva bucher to modern. In Belgium, I had school Saturday mornings also. The schedule was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, the whole day, Thursday half a day, Friday a whole day, Saturday half a day. So my father had convinced his father that he and I were going to the synagogue on Saturday mornings, but the real truth was that he was taking me to school. And in those days, my grandfather wasn't, let me say, capable of walking to the synagogue. He was an older man at that time. So we did all the right simple things at home, as I said before, kosher, lighting candles, Kiddush on Shabbos. So we did all the right things that, let me say, modern Jewish people would have done. And that's it.
Do you have any memories of being doing something with the community, going to religious school, like some religious instruction?
I did not go to any Jewish schools in Belgium, but I went to afternoon Jewish schools here in Montreal.
Which synagogue did you go to on high holidays in Brussels?
That I don't remember. Good question, but I don't remember it.
It's okay. When did you leave Belgium?
We left Belgium in 1951, December. We left to come to Canada via Le Havre in France. My mother was pregnant with my sister at the time. We came by ship. Apparently lots of people went on the same ship. It was part of the Cunard line. I remember it was called the Skytia. You remember that? Really?
I don't remember. I know about it.
Yes. All right. So we were on the Skytia. I enjoyed the voyage like it was a vacation for me. My mother didn't feel that well, more or less throwing up every day, being pregnant. And we landed in Halifax on December 23rd, 1951.
Why did your family leave Belgium?
My father had family here in Montreal. We had a very big family here in Montreal, well-known Montrealers. Specifically, my father's mother's sister. Is it important for me to tell you their names, or not
As
really?
you wish.
Anyway, it's some very well-known Montrealers.
But why, your family, your parents spent 15 years in Belgium. Why did they suddenly, at that point, decide to leave?
What I seem to remember, and maybe I'm mentioning incorrect countries, but people, especially Jewish people, were getting nervous about possibly there being another war or uprising. I seem to remember Japan, China, countries from that side of the world, and Jewish people were getting concerned about having to live through whatever they had previously. And Canada seemed to be the right place to move to, Montreal being for sure the right place, especially with my father having many members of his family living here. So that's why we moved here. My time out for a glass of water.
And Richard.
So we were talking about you came to Montreal because this is where you had family.
Right.
And you talked about the voyage. I was wondering if you have any memories of arriving in Halifax. You were 8.
Yes, I remember. We also visited where we landed with my wife, I don't know, 20, 30 years later, whatever. What I do remember is having a great time on board ship. I remember I enjoyed being on the ship, and my first experience, I guess, on such a big boat.
Were there other children there that you played with? Why did you enjoy it so much?
They had activities that I liked. I remember looking at this board, showing me where we had traveled in the last day, and so it was something that I enjoyed. It was nothing brilliant, but just for an 8-year-old, it was fun being on a boat.
When you left, did your parents explain to you, the 8-year-old boy, now we're leaving forever, we're moving to another country?
No,
You don't?
I would have taken all that in stride. It would normal. I mean, I wouldn't have thought anything negative. We're moving to Canada. Fine, so we moved to Canada. It was nothing frightening for me.
Your grandfather by that time had passed away.
Yeah.
Do you remember what you brought with you as a child from Brussels that you really wanted to have with you in your new life?
No. I remember we had a cat and a budgie bird and a fish in Belgium, but we didn't bring any of those with us.
So you arrived in Halifax, and you say you have some memories of this arrival.
We arrived on December 23rd. I had never seen snow up until then. And I'm not sure the method of how we got to Montreal, but we arrived here on the 25th. And we were, let me say, a very close family. Even in Montreal, we were very close. And let me add a few extra words.
Don't, because then it's a...
No, I don't want it to get caught over here. We had a matriarch in the family. My father's aunt was sort of in charge of everybody. And 2 of my father's cousins, 2 female cousins, were living on a street called, at the time, Maplewood. And the matriarch said to them, by the way, my nephew, his wife, and their son are coming to Montreal in December, the end of December, and I'd like them to move in with you. So that's what happened. We moved in with the 2 single girls. At the time, they were 19 and 22. And we moved to a very nice building on Maplewood, across from the University of Montreal. Was sort of just beginning to be built up. And we talk about it occasionally with the 2 girls that we lived with. It was a little bit fashionable in those days to sometimes, and they used to call them boarders, where they used to live with a family and pay them rent. And so it was, I don't think we paid them anything, but my father's aunt said, they're going to be moving in with you, and that's what happened. So we moved in there.
Did they have a big apartment?
Big enough for all of us to enjoy, and my sister had not yet been born, so we only were the 3 of us. And I went to a school called Guy Drummond, which was not that far from where we lived. And eventually the older girl was getting married very shortly after we moved in. So we all moved together, the remaining all of us moved together to St. Joseph Boulevard. And now we were the tenant, and the remaining girl who was not getting married was, let's say, living with us now. And by that time, my father was working and earning a living, whatever that meant. And I went to another school.
What did your father do, and how did he find a job?
Right away, he got involved in the fur business.
How did he find a job?
Probably very easy. I don't know which friend or which person he may have spoken to, but somebody said, I have a relative who's in the fur business. Do you have a place for him? And he went to work for that person. And that person and his wife and children became friends of my family. And even to today, he's the son now is my dentist.
Are they Jewish? Was that a
Yes,
Jewish family?
Yes.
Also immigrants?
No, they're Canadians. So moving to Montreal was very easy for us. My father's family, as I said, were very well-to-do people. I'm sure that they helped my family. We were together very frequently. Well, I'll tell you the name of the family. They call it Gewurz, Gewurz. And part of my father's uncle's claim to fame is that he owns Nuns Island. So they're well-to-do. And we had a big family here. We celebrated Shabbos together, holidays together, and we were part of, let me say, this minor community. And I established my friends, classmates. The other cute thing about my education is I've never been to grade 3. I was in grade 2 in Belgium. When I came here, they put me into grade 2, and the next year they found, I guess, that I was too smart for grade 3, so they put me into grade 4 at another school that I attended.
You went to school in French in Belgium. Did your parents think about trying to send you to French school here?
Very cute question. The French schools were part of the Catholic school system. And in those days, the Catholic school system was, let me say, religious to the point where religion was taught as part of the curriculum. And being Jewish, my parents didn't want me to be exposed to being taught Catholicism. The Protestant School Board, most of their schools, if not all of their schools, were English-speaking schools, but there was no major religious studies in the Protestant School Board. And so I went to the Protestant School Board, i.e. first Guy Drummond. And then when we moved to St. Joseph Boulevard, I went to Bancroft School, which is part of the Protestant School Board.
How did you learn English? How easy or difficult was it?
When you're 8, 9 years old, it comes very easily. I'm sure I learned it within 3 months or so. And then I remember also going to summer camp, which my family organized for us. So I went to a camp called Camp B'nai B'rith, which is still open today. I remember my parents paid for 3 weeks at $25, very special price, where I also met friends who I know today still. And for me, as for my parents, we became acclimatized very quickly. My parents became members of the club Les Amis de France et de Belgique.
What is that? I have never heard of that.
It's a club for people that came from Belgium or France.
Jews or?
Yes, yes. And my parents are buried in the cemetery that group purchased in Duvernay.
Where would this group be meeting, and what were their activities together?
Probably lots of people like my parents. They came from other countries, and they got together. They were all immigrants that came from French-speaking
But
France.
where would they meet here in Montreal?
Where would they meet? That I don't know. But I know that the president was the president for about 25 years. He was running the club, and some of the people I'm friends with them still today. So it was a place that my parents first got to meet lots of people, but my parents were very friendly type people. My sister tells me that that my mother was the type that if she went swimming, within 5 minutes she knew everybody in the pool and everybody knew her, and she would talk to people. And so my parents were friendly. My father was much quieter, but my father's personality was that he was very kind. If he can help somebody, he would help them, not necessarily with money, but with ideas and suggestions, and come to my house, or we'll give you supper, or whatever. Those were some of the things. So they were nice people, and I'm proud of them.
What kind of activities did they do with this friendship circle?
I don't know how frequently they met. Till today, by the way, I still go. They have a special service every New Year's. And my wife and I actually go to the cemetery, and we meet all the kids of people that have departed, I guess. They had probably monthly meetings where, I don't know. I remember they used to have a New Year's party that I know they had every year, a New Year's party. And they had a normal life, calling their friends on the phone, coming to the house, and they enjoyed themselves. And my mother was popular amongst her friends, as was my father. But my father left us too quickly.
Did they have, so that was one circle of friends for your parents. Did they make friends with Anglophone Jews? Was there any circle there, friendship circle?
Yes, let's say the building that we lived in, which was on the corner of St. Joseph and Hutchison, lots of Jewish people, 25 apartments in the building, 20 out of 80% were probably Jewish. And my parents knew all the people they wanted to know. And my mother and father had numerous good friends.
Non-Jewish as well?
Non-Jewish, yeah, my parents didn't make a difference. My father's restaurant was on St. Paul and St. Lawrence Boulevard. And these people that I'm going to talk to you about are not necessarily their friends, but stevedores, very strong guys that used to work in ships and all that, who used to eat in my father's restaurant from time to time. He would invite them to come to our house, and they would come to our house. My mother would make supper for them, and so yeah, my parents were very friendly, outgoing type people.
What difficulties, you mentioned when we first talked that you experienced some difficulties in your school. I can't remember if it was the first school or the second school.
Difficulties in school?
Yeah.
And I use those words?
I think so, but I may have interpreted it.
I never had difficulty in school with anything.
With people, no?
No. If anything, I don't want to talk too much about myself necessarily, but if anything, I was very popular, very successful, very good student, scholarships, so a good athlete. Well, maybe my friends would argue I'm not such a great athlete, but no, I had a normal, very nice life.
Have you ever come across not resentment, but some kind of not understanding when you first started school? You came from Europe, you probably looked different, dressed differently. I mean, that's at least what I heard from other survivors who may have been older.
No, I fit in right away, and I had no difficulties. No, and as I said, if anything, I was extremely popular in school. I never had difficulties.
Tell me about, you went to Barrambing for several years, so tell me about that school and your time there and your friends there.
Right. Barrambing was, if you don't know, was probably established for people like myself, for Europeans, immigrants, Jewish, and the school was probably made up of, even though it was part of the Protestant School Board, probably 95% of the students were Jewish, and the ones that weren't Jewish were probably Oriental. So there weren't that many, let me say, white Christian students, but there were some, and they weren't treated any differently than we were. It was probably the nicest 4 years of my life. I really liked the people there. Almost, even though I went to McGill and I happened to be an engineer, graduated from McGill, I don't even remember my classmates from McGill. From Barrambing, I remember all my classmates. My best friends today are my Barrambing classmates or friends. My license plate says BBHS for Barrambing High School. I consider it as a special school, almost exclusively. I'm advertising not for Barrambing, but it's closed. Almost exclusively, everybody that I went to school with cares about all their classmates. Next Sunday, I have a reunion with 98 of my classmates up north. I went to Barrambing.
Why was it so special for you, or why do you think it was so special, this school?
I'm not sure, but maybe many of us had the same characters, i.e. same upbringing, most of us anyway. There were Canadians also, but a lot of immigrants. One of my friends tells me a story that when he came to Montreal and he went to Barrambing, his mother came into our class and said, "Wer hat Yiddish du? Who speaks Yiddish here?" "Ich hat Yiddish." So the teacher said, okay, fine. Well, I didn't understand what you said, but you said what? Let's go sit with him. And there's a little bit of a joke with that because he tells me that I taught him how to write his name. So I said I didn't really do such a good job because today you're a doctor and nobody can read your handwriting anyway today. But the essence, and I don't want to sound like I'm advertising Barambing, but the essence is that everybody cared about everybody. And many of us, like Sonia, has probably the same background that I had. So anyway, that to me were the 4 best years of my life.
How did your parents manage with English? Because you came to a city that turned out to be English rather than French at the time you arrived, which may have been a shock to them.
They learned English. They spoke French, and
they learned it just on the job or on the street?
Right, friends, whatever. One of my friends has told me that he never understood, he's a Canadian, meaning he was not an immigrant, that in our house we had the Canada Adler, which was a Jewish newspaper, we had the Montreal Gazette, and we had the La Presse. So he says to me, I never knew if you were Jewish, you were English, you were French. I mean, you had all these 3 newspapers. But also, probably, I haven't checked with other people, but in any given sentence, my family and I used to speak English, French, and Yiddish in any given sentence. So we had no problem assimilating here, as did my parents. My parents had lifelong friends and good friends, and today they're all buried in the same place.
What was the most difficult thing for you and for your parents in settling here when you first came, if you can think back?
I don't think we have any difficulties. No. My father more or less started working day one. They had their friends.
Did they belong to a synagogue? Did your family join a synagogue?
Yes, we lived across the street from the synagogue.
Which one?
Called, in those days it was called the Rumänische Schule. You know it too?
No, I'm just surprised. Why Romanian synagogue?
I don't know. That was the name of the synagogue. It was also called the Beth David Synagogue, and it eventually moved to Côte St. Luc, and now it's on Harrow Road in Côte St. Luc. What happened to me is I enjoyed singing, as my parents enjoyed singing, so I started singing in the synagogue choir. So I used to go to the synagogue every Saturday. And one of my dear friends is somebody that I met in the choir, I don't know, 70 years ago. So no, we didn't have any problems coming from Europe, speaking the language, settling, friends. No.
You mentioned that you went to Jewish afternoon school here in Montreal?
Yes. It was sort of fashionable in those days for kids to go to school, like me, from 9 to 3, and then you can go to Jewish school from 4:30 to 6.
Every day?
5 days a week. So that's what I did.
Where did you go to Jewish school?
Where?
Where was that? Yeah.
It was on St. Joseph Boulevard, where we lived, called Talmud Torah. So it was on St. Joseph, just below Park Avenue, not far from where we actually lived. Did I learn a lot? I'm not sure. But in my later years, I've befriended many rabbis, and I studied past tense with rabbis on a weekly basis. I used to study an hour, 2 hours per week.
How many years did you go to the Talmud Torah?
About 4 years.
More
So-
like elementary school.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Past your bar mitzvah?
Just past my bar mitzvah, yes.
Tell me about your bar mitzvah.
I did what all Jewish kids do. Because I guess I was singing in the choir across the street, and my father was a member of that synagogue, or my parents were members of that synagogue. That's where I had my bar mitzvah. And let me add something I don't like to say too loudly, but because we were not rich, we had the party at a, let me say, a secondary type of location. It was, I remembered it as a Chazan Master's residence. So we had that. It was also on Hutchison, not far from where we lived. But again, none of these things, when I was growing up, ever bothered me. I was a normal kid like every other kid.
Did your parents have any involvement in the community beyond going on high holidays, like membership in any committee or charity?
No, they were
Women's
members. They
Mizo or-
were members of the committees of the Les Amis de France de Belgique, but no other things. No.
You mentioned that you went to McGill, you became an engineer, and you worked as an engineer as well?
Yes. When I graduated, I had a job with the federal government, and my position was one of, they were hiring engineers who wanted to expand into business. And we were very spoiled by being able to do things that we wanted to do, so we would ask the person in charge of our group, we want to go to California to see how they increase sales in certain businesses. What I ended up doing is my father died a few months after I graduated from university. I had moved to Ottawa to work for the government, where I met my wife. And when my father died, being a mother's boy, I moved back to Montreal to be with my mother and sister. And I was able to work with the government, representing them in different industries. I represented them in shipbuilding for Canadian Vickers, and airplanes with a company at the time called Canadair, and an electronics company called Canadian Marconi. So I represented the government in analyzing the amount of research and development money that we should be offering to these different companies for whatever they were doing. And I did this for the government for about 10 years. And then I had a different thing in my life, which also included my dad in some way. Not in some way, in some major way. And that's a very, very long story. I don't know if...
You went into real estate, right, after that?
I went into real estate after that.
You basically took over what your father started with his... with
brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Right, his European brother-in-law.
So you met your wife in Ottawa. Can you tell me something about her, her name and her background?
Let me start off by saying she's a wonderful girl. We've been married now for 54 years. We met very shortly after I started working for the government. I started working with them June 5th, 1967. It just so happened, but she tells me it has nothing to do with anything, but it just so happened that her mother happened to be working in the same building that I was working in. And she says that her mother never told her about me, but maybe later on she'll tell you as part of whatever she wants to say. What I hear, I don't like those types of words, but she said, I looked outside the window, I saw this guy, I said, I'm going to marry him. So something like that happened. Anyway, eventually she moved to Montreal before we were married. She went to school here, and she's a fashion type of girl. She joined a very big textile firm, Bruck Mills, and she worked with them for a few years. And we got married 3 years after I had met her. And one of the things that I think about is my father died very shortly after I started working in Ottawa and after I met her. And I prayed, as I told you at the outset of the discussion, that I prayed for my father for 11 months. And I occasionally had meetings in Ottawa, and I did not drive a car in those days. So I would take a bus, and she would know because I would tell her I'll be in Ottawa tonight. And she would wait for me at the bus stop and take me to the synagogue to pray. Which eventually I said, a girl that does something like that must be special. But she's special in many ways, in everything that she does. So, anyway, so she'll give you women details.
You haven't mentioned her name?
Her name is Joanne Linda.
And where was she born?
She was born in Ottawa. Her family's family name is Benwick. One of the claim to fame that I think about is her grandmother had the first mikveh in Ottawa. And the second thing that I think of sometimes is her grandmother lived to almost 100 years of age. And her parents were very nice people and treated me nicer than I should have been treated. I was treated royally if ever I showed up. Her father would run out and set up a hammock for me so I would be able to relax. And they were very, very nice people. Joanne has a brother who's very nice. He's younger than she is. He lives in Vancouver. And we're in contact with each other. We're very family-oriented. Joanne has taken on my complete family, knows everybody's name, their birthday, et cetera, et cetera. And she's a great girl. We had some difficulties in becoming parents. We couldn't become parents until almost 17 years after we were married. And the cute thing is, I'll try to say this very quickly, is one day I woke up and I said to my wife, I said, you know, I'd like to find out where all my classmates are, what they're doing with their lives today. And this was 25 years after we had graduated high school. And I decided to, because when I was in high school, I'm sort of saying this backwards, when I was in high school, I was the associate editor of a book that we printed up every year about the graduates. So I said, you know, I'd like to do something and find out where all my classmates are. So we spent 1 year. I organized a committee, and we, let me say, updated the 1960 yearbook into a 1985 yearbook, where people would send us their picture of 1985. They would tell us in answers to whatever I was writing, what their marital status was, if they had children, etc., what they did professionally, where they traveled, what their fond memories of school was. So, and then we eventually printed a hardcover book and gave them to all the students. In those days, I was running a company where I can tell my employees, this is what I'd like you to do, etc. And so many of them worked on the yearbook. But the cute thing of that is that I discovered that one of my classmates was a gynecologist. The one that I taught how to write his name was a gynecologist living in Dallas, Texas. So I called him and I said, Lionel, I'm happy to be speaking with you, and I'll make it short. My wife and I are having difficulties having a child. Is there anything that you can do for us? And after conversation, and he said, if you want, I can try to get you at the top of the line with any of the doctors that you want. Anyway, the net result is he gave us a little hint on what we should be buying, which we bought, and shortly thereafter my wife became pregnant. So my thinking and my wife's thinking is, if we would not have done that project, we never would have realized that he's a gynecologist living in Dallas, Texas. Today we're very good friends with him.
So you have a son?
Yes.
What's his
we have
name?
a son. His name is Jonathan Raphael. Jonathan after my father, Jonathan. And Raphael was my father-in-law's name. He's 37 years of age. He's my best friend, and he's an amazing, amazing young man.
Do you have grandchildren?
We have 2 grandchildren. We have a boy whose name is Devin, D-E-V-I-N, who's going to be 8. And we have a granddaughter whose name is Michelle, and she's going to be 4. I said 5 before, but she's going to be 4. 2 amazing kids. I'm not biased. They're amazing.
Did you give your son a Jewish education when he was growing up?
He went to Jewish schools till, I like that question, till grade 8. But then my wife and I said, we don't want our son to think that the world is made up of only Jewish people. So then we sent him to a private school, which was not Jewish, Selwyn House, which is an amazing school. And the last 4 years, he studied there. My grandkids go to Jewish school. My grandson is going into grade 3 now, and he goes to the school that is associated with the Shar Shemayim synagogue. My daughter-in-law her background is Sephardic. She comes from an Iraqi family.
Mizrahi. She's Mizrahi.
She's what?
Mizrahi.
Mizrahi? I don't understand what you're trying to say.
I'll explain after, yeah.
Okay. So my granddaughter goes to, what's the name of the school or daycare center? Spanish and Portuguese. But she was just accepted to go into kindergarten in my grandson's school.
At Solomon Schechter, yeah.
No, Solomon Schechter is where
that's
my
Shara,
son, this is called Akiva.
Yeah.
And my son went to Solomon Schechter after he went to a Jewish people's school. So he went to a few schools, but again, my wife and I wanted him to be, I don't know what the right word is, but a man about town. So he's a great kid, so he knows Judaism, and he has Christian friends also. And professionally, I don't have enough time to talk about him. He's a great, great young man.
Have you ever experienced any discrimination here in Canada as a Jew, either in social settings or work settings?
When we first came in 51, let me say, I don't like the word fashionable, but it was fashionable for French kids to try to beat up Jewish kids. I've never really had it personally, but I know that it existed, and I made sure that I didn't hang around with, let's say, French Catholic kids. Professionally, I did lots of business with French Canadian people, and I don't have a problem with anybody, really.
St. Joseph Boulevard, where you were living after, what kind of an area was it at the time? In terms
English,
of ethnic?
English, and there were Jewish people because the synagogue was more or less across the street from us. So, and the Jewish school was almost on the corner of the street. So there were lots of Jewish kids. All the kids that I was friends with where we lived, one was Christian and the rest were Jewish. And in those days, unlike today, we used to play on the street and the laneways, and so that's the answer. Anyway, I don't want to talk politics, but I'm concerned about the world, especially for my grandchildren.
Do you think Joanna would want to come in and kind of
Yes.
introduce herself? And you can't go, you have to shout.
Yes.
Maybe you can stop it anyways.
Thank
So go ahead.
you. This young man over here
That's you?
is me in the comment. So because I'm standing, Joanne and I concluded that I must be at least 1 year old.
You're in the center?
No, the
No.
one on the left.
You can point to it.
Who are those other children? Those are Jewish children? Do you know anything about them?
I doubt it. I don't know. I didn't have enough time to become good friends with him. This is a picture of my dad
Where was that already?
in Belgium.
Still in Belgium.
Yeah. So when I look at that, I see he's a little bit of a swinger with a turtleneck. And that's all the pictures that I have right now. I have another one of sort of what he may have looked like when he was in concentration camp. But I know that he was only 77 pounds, so that's at the end of his stay in Auschwitz, so I'm sure much worse than that. And I said that my mom had gained a little bit of weight after her wedding. So this is us in Belgium, my father, mother, and I.
You mentioned your sister, who was 10 years younger than you, so she was born in
Montreal,
in 53? No,
52.
52.
Yes.
And what's her name? Because we didn't.
Lana,
Lana.
Lana. And she's a wonderful, wonderful girl.
She lives in Montreal?
No, she lives in Miami, and she's married to a very nice person who they were introduced by one of my friends who had moved to Miami. And one day I called him and I said, Harry, my sister is vacationing in Miami. Do you have any nice boys to introduce her to? To which he did. So they've been married for many years now. And my sister has 3 girls, twin girls and single girl. And the single girl has a child. Well, she's married, has a child, and that's what keeps my sister busy.
So So I don't know if your wife is joining us.
I'm not allowed to walk, but
Yes, Robert can go on.
Recording.
So Joanne, I would like to introduce you, Simon's best half.
Yes.
And you said you wanted to add some things to his story.
One time I was sitting with my mother-in-law, and I must have asked her a question about the war, and she just started talking. And I grabbed a little envelope and I started scribbling on all 4 sides, inside out, and whatever. And she just kept talking, and then that was it. She never spoke about it again. She got everything out, and that was it. So I was listening to Simon speaking, and there were just a few little details. I think a priest told Hella that she should dress up as a nun and take him to the convent. She didn't really like that idea. Others, I think, were doing it, but she didn't like the idea. So that's the reason she went by herself with him. And she paid. She had to give money. That's why she was working, sewing, and whatever job she could find to pay the Sister Superior, who was apparently the only one that knew about the situation they set up for Simon. And she paid. And she went to visit, and she would sometimes get lifts in trucks and walk. And that's how she got there.
Because she wasn't living in
No, because it was
Liège.
between Brussels and Liège. I
Liège.
don't know how far it was.
But she wasn't living in Liège.
No,
Okay.
no. So she could get a lift with a truck and walk, and however she could. She made it there at least once a week. And then when she wanted to leave, as Simon said, the Sister Superior didn't want. But after a lot of screaming and yelling and begging, she let her go with Simon. And they packed up a little bag of things and gave it to her. And then as far as staying with people, she stayed in many places. From my scribbles, there was a Belgian family that let her live in their house with Simon for 9 months. She sometimes stayed with friends. She went to one cousin of Simon's father who wouldn't open the door and wouldn't let her in to hide her because people were killed if they were found.
But he was also Jewish, though. He must
Yeah.
have been.
A cousin, and would not open the door. But every day was a different story. She hid in somebody's basement with others. She was almost caught by the Germans several times. Word would get around that they had started in Brussels, and they were moving into Antwerp, the Germans, and they were doing nighttime raids, and word filtered out, and people started running scared. And then she just, if you didn't stay, I think, in a Jewish area, you were safer. So I think they were just moving around all the time, where whatever people told them to do. She had a contact who was helping her to go to Switzerland at some point, but the contact was caught by the Germans. So that was the end of that idea. So then she went and hid with a Belgian family for a while. So, I guess every week just brought another story. And when Simon's father went to Malines, he thought he could get work. I mean, he literally thought he could get work, and they could earn some money. It was advertised. Word was spread around. The Germans were already in Belgium then, working with the Jewish Congress, and they were getting lists of all the Jewish people in Antwerp, Brussels, whatever. And they said the men would be protected if they went to work. They cooperated. They said the wives and grandparents would also be protected. So he went like that to Malines, and, that was it. And there were some statistics I saw where Simon was one of 3,000 Jewish children who were hidden in Belgian convents during the Nazi occupation. And then there were some other details when Simon's father came back to Belgium. I think he was in Brussels first. She wasn't clear whether Brussels and I don't know how it all happened. But he was put in a sanitarium in Belgium, and he had pleurisy, but he wasn't getting any better. So the Red Cross sent him to eventually to Switzerland, where he improved. Now, how he went to Switzerland was his dad's sister was in France, somehow gone to France during the war because he sent postcards to her. Nathan sent postcards to her with German stamps on them. It was kind of in code and would just say he's fine and whatever, but it said Auschwitz with the German stamps and everything, and she got 2 of those cards. But being in Paris, eventually her husband was German. They ended up in Mexico, so somehow they were able to get to Mexico. So I guess they found out what had happened. He was back in town and whatever, and had pleurisy. So they sent $500 to Hella to send him to a sanitarium in Switzerland because he wasn't getting better. He had water in the lungs and all kinds of things. He wasn't really getting better in Belgium. So it was wonderful that they sent that money. And he improved. And I think he was there a month and a half. And he improved. And then back to Brussels, Antwerp. And then life continued.
Thank you very much.
Those were just some of the details. I think it was mostly just little, because you kept asking about where did she stay, how did she support herself, whatever, just doing whatever she could. But there were lots of people who were willing to take her in and help her.
Simon, is there anything else you would like to add that we didn't talk about?
I'm a very deep thinker, and I'm also a philosopher. I don't know if I should say this, but I think I will. That one of the motivations for me is studying my parents' life and how they suffered, and some of the successes that I've achieved is because of things that happened to my parents. There are too many examples to discuss or to share with you, but I am who I am today because of my parents. Seeing the good things, but also the things that I didn't like, made me a better person and a successful person. As I mentioned, maybe this is very simple to say, my parents worked very hard and had no money, and didn't have the respect that I believed they should have had, because everybody else in my family was very well-to-do. So my parents were just, here's Nathan and Hella. Somebody else who had a few extra dollars, wow, take a look who's here, kiss, 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 kiss. So things like that made me want to be successful. And with Joanne's help and God's help, we became successful. And part of the reason is how I saw my parents and the life that they lived. Anyway, I appreciate the time that you've given us to say some of these things. And I'm sorry that I did not have the intelligence to speak to my parents to find out from them everything that happened. But as a child and as a grown-up, I didn't realize that it was something that I should find out. But this interview would have been much easier if I would have found out everything that I did some research on.
Do you mention the story when you met that man in the synagogue?
No.
This was another very fluky thing.
I don't really understand what I'm going to tell you. But very quickly, when my mother passed away, I had a schedule of all the synagogues and the times when they would have their services. Depending on where I was in the city at a particular time, I would go to this synagogue because I was not far from there at a meeting, or I would go to this synagogue because I wasn't too far from that place. So I gave different synagogues. From time to time I was there. And it just so happened that once I happened to be near a synagogue called the Chevra Kadisha, which is on Clanranald. And I had prayed there a few times. And there was one person who knew me very well in the synagogue. And now I tell you the story. Some person walks into the synagogue and sits, my baby sister, sits next to the person that happens to know me. Now again, I believe in God, and I believe that He manipulates all these things. And one of the thoughts that I have is this person could have sat anywhere. But he sat next to the one person that actually knows me and knows my name. And I'm told by this person that knows me that this other person that came into the synagogue, during their conversations, said, "Who's that?" pointing to me. So he said, "Oh, that's Simon Margol." So that's the end of the first part of the story. Second part of the story is we're ready to go out of the synagogue. And I don't know anything that I'm telling you right now, except I heard it after. So I'm ready to walk out, and this person, who was the stranger that came into the synagogue, says to me, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "I'm sorry, I don't recognize you at all. I don't know who you are." I said, "But give me your name. Maybe it means something to me." So he gives me his name. I said, "No, I'm sorry. I don't know who you are." So he says, "I never knew that your father survived Auschwitz. I never knew your father moved to Montreal." He said, "I never knew your father had a son." I said, "Who are you?" She said, "I slept in the same bed, bunk with your father in Auschwitz." We both started to cry. And he said, "If there's any place where you would know somebody's personality, is in a place like a concentration camp." He said, "Your father was an amazing person." That's more or less the end of the story. But when I came home and I told Joanne the story, I said, I don't understand. I didn't take the guy's name down. I don't have his telephone number. I have no idea who it was.
I wanted to bop him. What?
And I said, this doesn't make sense to me. And then I brought in God again, and I said, but it's a miracle. I mean, all the things that I just told you that happened to make this conversation take place, and for him to have time to tell me what a great person my father was something that God wanted. Anyway, again, it doesn't make any sense to me, but that took place. Anyway, so that's the story.
Thank you very much, Simon. Thank you. Thank you, Joanna.
Thank you very much. Do you want to